We welcome you to John J. Homestead State Historic Site, home of one of America's principal founding fathers. After nearly 30 years of working to build the nation, John Jay retired here in 1801 to live as a gentleman farmer. Our story begins 5 years later when his son William comes home from college to help with the harvest.
What business is all this, Papa? For the farm?
Letters. Between your mother and me, mostly. We spent a lot of time apart when you were a child.
My memories are full of her sickness.
Oh, no, son. You mustn't think of her that way. Your mother was a wonder. A light. Radiant with life.
Never was I more sensible of the absolute ascendancy you have over my heart. Farewell, my best beloved, your wife till death, and after that a ministering spirit.
This farm was our dream. Had she lived, I should deem this the most agreeable part of my life. But just months after we finally retired here, she was gone. I've thought of your mother much lately, since you've been away at Yale. I know she would be very, very proud of you.
Papa, at school I've heard talk concerning you that I fail to understand.
Such as?
I've heard it said that you opposed independence when you served in the Congress.
That's true, William, initially.
But you were a patriot. You helped found the country.
Britain was our country at that time, William. I had great affection for her. I had the greatest respect for British law, although the law wasn't applied equally to the colonists. Still, many of us believed that every effort must be made to reconcile with Britain before resorting to war. I argued that point at the Congress in 1774.
Permit us to be as free as yourselves, and we will ever esteem a union with you to be our greatest glory and our greatest happiness. But we will never submit to be hewers of wood or drawers of water for any ministry or nation in the world.
While I sympathized with the people of Boston suffering under occupation, I wasn't eager to follow them into rebellion. I felt it better to rely and insist on our rights as British subjects. Mr. Adams and I often disagreed in those days. But as oppression increased, I eventually came over to Mr. Adams' point of view, that we had to choose between having merely a British king or having the full legal rights of British citizens. And it was much preferable to have rights.
It must have been hard for you. For your mother country to become your enemy?
And for dear friends to become enemies. Your mother and I were forced to flee northward just ahead of the British advance from New York City. My responsibility then was to deal with loyalists suspected of sedition. I interrogated them. Some we imprisoned or sent into exile. Others were shot.
Jay's ability and activism in the Patriot cause propelled him to the presidency of the Continental Congress in 1778. His term ended when Congress decided his talents would be put to best use in Europe, first to gain foreign assistance, later to negotiate peace.
I've heard others talk of your involvement in negotiating the treaty to end the war. They say that the key to American success was your disobeying your instructions.
Yes, well, our instructions could have meant disaster for America. My part in the Peace of Paris actually began in Madrid, where I was sent on a diplomatic mission to seek financial support for the war. But Spain was willing to offer little direct aid to rebellious colonies in America. I quickly learned that we could trust our allies to act in our interest. only when it was in their interest to do so. This insight helped me when I was next called to Paris to aid Dr. Franklin in the negotiation of a treaty to end the war. Congress had instructed us to obey French counsel in negotiations with the British, but the French were interested in prolonging the negotiations until they had achieved their own objectives in their war with England.
Jay's conviction was that America's interests would be served best if America negotiated without French involvement, contrary to Congress's instructions. Franklin disagreed, but Jay was adamant.
If my instructions conflict with America's honor and dignity, I would break them. Like this.
In fact, the British were anxious for peace and conditions ripe for negotiation. I decided to press our advantage in direct talks with the British envoys, without the knowledge or interference of the French.
Did Dr. Franklin agree with your actions?
Not at first, but Mr. Adams and I saw eye to eye. Although we often disagreed with ardor in Congress, we soon found that we shared the same views.
Professor Goodrich, he told us how you annoyed the British by insisting they recognize American independence before negotiations could begin.
Yes, after congenial Dr. Franklin, I think the British envoys were quite unhappy with me. But I was firm. To get proper terms, we had to sit with them as equals. In the end, we secured not only our independence, but the extension of America's borders to the Mississippi.
The final peace agreement, signed by John Jay, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin, is considered one of the greatest achievements in diplomatic history and made heroes of the three in America.
Congress made you their Secretary for Foreign Affairs, their principal diplomat. You reported directly to Congress.
Yes, but it was frustrating. Without a strong central government, it was impossible to require the states to fulfill the terms of our treaties. I joined Alexander Hamilton and James Madison in writing the Federalist Essays to convince the voters of New York to ratify the Constitution.
And once the Constitution was established and the first election held for president, you came in third in the balloting, did you not? Behind Washington and Adams?
It was of little matter, William. I did not seek the honor. President Washington, however, was kind enough to offer me my choice of offices. I chose the Supreme Court.
Yes. It was while you were Chief Justice that you negotiated another treaty, the one they call after your name. I've been astonished to hear. I was once sitting in the Commons with my classmates, and some had the rudeness to suggest that you betrayed the country, that you gave too much to the British and received nothing in return.
We avoided war, William. And at that time, peace was the most precious prize to be won. I knew the treaty would provoke anger, but I feared for our country, William. We had no navy. Our defenses were feeble. President Washington decided to send an envoy to London. After months of difficult negotiation, a treaty was made. There were few concessions from the British, but war was avoided and our neutrality preserved.
President Washington and most of Congress recognized the difficult circumstances and ratified the treaty, but most Americans were not as understanding.
I like to say in those days that I could make my way by night from one side of the country to the other by the light of all the fires burning me in effigy.
I find it astounding that you could make light of it.
I have great faith in the American people, William, that they will someday understand.
Yet they fail to see that your efforts saved the country from destruction.
But there were many people who still supported me. I was twice elected as governor. When my second term ended, President Adams asked me to be Chief Justice once more. But your mother was in failing health. For 27 years she had accepted God's plan for me and patiently waited while public matters overshadowed those of family.
I more than ever wish for the time that will put a period to your public cares and permit the indulgence of retirement and rural quiet.
Papa, you had given America so much. I only wish you and Mama had more time to enjoy here together.
God has blessed us, William. Here in the tranquility of the countryside, one has the gift of time for reflection. I have a long life to look back upon, and an eternity to look forward to.
Leading diplomat, first Chief Justice of the United States, and two-term Governor of New York. John Jay was one of America's principal founding fathers. Upon John Jay's death in 1829, William Jay inherited the farm. It passed through 3 subsequent generations of the Jay family until the Jay heirs sold the house and grounds to become a museum and historic site in 1958. The property opened to the public in 1964 as John Jay Homestead State Historic Site. Discover for yourself the historic house, its beautiful grounds, and the fascinating stories of the family who lived here.